Welcome to the Control Engineering webcast, Digital Blind Spots, Access Real-Time Data for Agile, Resilient Operations, sponsored by PTC. Here are some tips to help you get the most from today's webcast. If you're experiencing issues with your slides or audio, refresh your browser or click the Refresh Media button directly under the presenter's picture. You can control the volume of the webcast by adjusting the volume on your computer or by adjusting the volume on the webcast platform. If you're having technical problems with audio or the slide presentation, click on the question mark at the top right corner of the screen to access a list of system checks to try before contacting an online technician. But if you do need a technician, type a message in the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Individual technical questions will be answered in the Answered Questions box. Type questions for our speakers in the Ask a Question box on the left side of the screen. The live Q&A session will begin after the presentation concludes. Today's webcast is being recorded. You will receive an email within a week with the link to the on-demand event. To download a certificate of completion and a PDF copy of the presentation, use the Event Resources tab on the left side of the screen. Those documents also will be available with the on-demand version of the webcast. I'm happy to introduce today's speakers today, Tom Gaudette and Christina Shannon. Christina is the Vice President of Information Technology for Anchor Glass, where she owns the vision and execution of Anchor's IT strategic plan. Christina is a multi-industry technology executive leader with a proven track record of building high-performing teams, driving business innovation, cutting millions in operational expenses, and implementing enterprise-wide risk-based solutions. At Anchor, she migrated the business-critical systems from on-premises to full cloud hosting, reducing the data center footprint by 60%. Christina's transformational leadership style, combined with her IT vision, set a standard of flawless execution and delivers an unmatched competitive advantage for Anchor Glass. Tom leads the product management for Kepware business at PTC. Tom brings 7 years of engineering experience to his position on PTC's product management team and is currently focused on expanding Kepware's functionality. He applies a pragmatic approach to product management, desiring to fully understand market initiatives and requirements. Tom is passionate about technology and learning how organizations collect, manage, and store data and the implications it has on business. He enjoys sharing ideas and working with customers across a variety of industry verticals to find innovative solutions for their challenges. All right, please go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate the introduction and happy to be here with Christina to chat a little bit about digital blind spots and accessing real-time data for agile, resilient operations. First, I want to give a quick introduction to PTC for those of you that may not be aware. We are a technology partner who specializes in digital transformation and innovation with experience driving impact in thousands of manufacturing and industrial environments worldwide. As a global ISV, we have over 6,000 employees and are trusted by over 30,000 customers. An area within PTC that I am particularly passionate about is with Kepware. Kepware has proven reliability to over 30,000 customers that we brought along with us in our acquisition of PTC in 2016. We've been entrusted in the factory for over 20 years, and we deliver a broad range of drivers available to our customers, enabling them to connect their devices from the plant floor into their operation systems in a variety of different ways. That's a quick introduction for us, and I think I'll pass it over to Christina for Anchor Glass.
Take myself off mute there. Hi, so Anchor Glass is a manufacturing facility, or we are 6 plants we manufacture glass containers, 6 plants across the U.S., 28 production lines, 10 tanks, a number of products from the standpoint of beer. We serve the beer, food, and liquor markets. Anchor is really on the digitalization journey, I'd say, within the last 2 years, and PTC has been a big enabler of such, which we'll get into shortly.
Excellent.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Certainly. So we're going to go, here are some key learning objectives in front of you. We're going to talk about some operational resiliency and the way in which Anchor Glass has leveraged some of the PTC technology to drive that, as well as talk about some of the OT and IT convergence, what that means to the market, as well as what it's meant to Anchor Glass. And Christine's going to go through a use case specific dealing with PTC technology and enabling them to create some resiliency and bring their data into the platforms it's necessary for. To start off, however, I do want to kick in a survey for you. So a quick polling question for you. All would love to have some responses. What are the top 3 challenges your organization faced during your response to the pandemic? It's one of the areas that I think is very important to operational resiliency and has been exacerbated or heightened by COVID is the IT-OT convergence, and it's really accelerated a lot of people's need for adjustments on the plant floor when it comes to digitizing their factories. So your answers to this will really help us out a little bit in understanding what is necessary or what those challenges that you've had to face and go into adjustments for because of the COVID pandemic. Have some great information coming in and really appreciate it. And one of them that I'm seeing the most so far is pointing towards IT and OT working together. It's an area that I'm pretty passionate about when it comes to the IT-OT convergence, because when it comes down to it, the everyday of working in a factory is really all about people. Even though we have plenty of automation out there, it's making sure that the people who are controlling and managing and installing and setting up that manufacturing line are able to talk to each other as they're getting the different parts and pieces put together. Because it's not just one person, it's a massive team usually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, Tom, and just say that couldn't agree more, and that in my world, it's the terminology around the IT and the OT, I still think is something that needs to be better defined for the OT side than the IT side, and we'll get to that in a minute. But when I first got here, I ran around and asked everybody in a plant, let's partner, let's do IoT. And I can tell you, like I said, that they didn't understand what the OT part was, that they were doing it. They just didn't know what the OT term stood for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Terminology is important, and understanding the different roles in the organization are also really important. So I think we've had this up for a little bit, and I'd like to share this with the audience. Some great insights here. The top 2 places that we are looking at are around that IT and OT working together, as well as a lack of standardization, which kind of plays into that. And we're going to talk about parts of that as we go into operational resiliency. Loving that security is a strong third there. With lack of access and operational data, I think those go together as well. But security is another area specific to OT that I'm really passionate about. And anyone who has questions around that area, although it's not a topic for this webinar, I could talk to you at length as to why it's important. So I think we'll slide on to the next portion of the webinar and really get into the meat of that, and that is operational resiliency. So the way that I define operational resiliency is that it's the capacity of an organization to adapt when external conditions and pressure operations' ability to deliver products or services. Such pressures could include unsafe, hazardous, or compromising conditions. So that's really my take on that. Christina, how about yourself? How do you define operational resiliency?
So when I think of operational resiliency, I put my cybersecurity hat on. That's prior to becoming a CIO, I've spent many years in a CISO or senior security type roles, and so naturally, when I think about operational resiliency, my brain goes to risk, and so then it goes to okay, we'll think about this in a similar manner as what we think about how you manage incident response handling. It goes to thinking about, a business capabilities or a business's maturity and capabilities to identify, protect, detect, and respond to, any types of adverse business events that would take down, systems or cause any type of exposure that wasn't planned. So.
That's a great way to look at it. And I really consider the security risk associated with operational resiliency falling under that compromising condition. Almost every week we hear about another condition in which an organization has been in some way compromised and unfortunately interrupts or disables their production capabilities. So it's a huge thought process as far as PTC is concerned, and obviously our customers like Anchor Glass are concerned about it as well. The next thing I wanted to chat about was how we kind of each of us viewed the market as far as like pre-COVID and what we were really driving after as far as doing our digital transformations or supporting them for the PTC side. The areas that we really heard from customers most was around getting that operational data available to other areas of the company to really drive some efficiencies throughout their organization, and that brought in the IT/OT convergence as far as leveraging different technology and organizational changes around their people. But also, to a lesser extent, I think if we think about back to 2019, people were starting to think about security a little bit more. It wasn't as much of a forefront thought, but I believe that it's grown since then. But how did you view your organization as far as digital transformation prior to COVID?
So was that for me, Tom?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I figured. So prior to COVID, I don't think that we had as much of a push for the digital transformation. It was more of a, this is the mindset of this is the way we've always done it, reigned supreme more so, I think, before COVID. Post-COVID, it became, the need to see data or to have data centralized, to have data moved off of paper, right, from a process in the plant. It all like went super fast in terms of overnight. Like the night before, everyone was okay turning knobs in a plant and reporting data that happened the next day. After COVID, when we had people weren't coming in, we had to then figure out very quickly how you make that data centralized and accessible by all, so they can gain the insight they need to make decisions because they're no longer in the plant or in the corporate office like they were before. So that's how I would say it. Back to you, Tom. So I definitely think what I was trying to say is COVID really has amplified or progressed our digital transformation more than not.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that throughout the market in general here at PTC. A lot of our customers are really going after projects that are enabling them to remotely view and manage different systems much faster than they were doing before. So getting that operational data has been severely intensified by the situation of people having to work from home or remotely, whatever it may be. And so it certainly expedited those digital transformation implementation timeframes. The IT/OT convergence really, like the need for people to work together became so much more important, lots more close collaboration, and it was absolutely necessary versus being sort of an optional, like, let's see if we can do things together. This is no, we have to do these things together. And so cybersecurity really came to the forefront, outside of the fact that we were battling a global pandemic with the COVID virus. We were also at the same time seeing more and more infiltrations into critical infrastructure as well as businesses. It wasn't just, areas of the country that were ancillary. This is some really important stuff. And so the cybersecurity really came up at the forefront. And that leads in, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, in our case, some of the in manufacturing industry in general, especially if you're a privately held company like Anchor is, you don't have a lot of other than the breaches that you hear in the news, you don't typically have the compliance frameworks you see elsewhere. And so what happened for us was we didn't really have multi-factor in place for remotely accessing the network. We didn't have some of those other capabilities that a majority of companies would have already had. So that was what happened for us on the security front was we went into high gear and then got the support we needed from the powers that be, the board and everyone else to go ahead and then get the additional security protections that we needed to mitigate, the risk of having a compromise that would lead to a network compromise that would lead to production disruption. So all of your points couldn't agree more, Tom.
Yeah, that really just ties back to the idea of having the resiliency, specifically data mission critical stuff, right? The ability to access it, monitor what's going on, and have good controls around that. As a privately held company, I think that you'd generally be surprised that a lot of other companies throughout many different industries during the past year have spent a fair amount making sure that they were almost what I heard you say was you were almost retroactively instilling your two-factor authentication and making sure that employees could still access the data they needed in a secure way. And a lot of companies were doing that at the same time. It wasn't just Anchor Glass. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, we're rolling out technologies that enable remote collaboration, such as like Teams or Zoom or whatever the choice is. And then on the other hand, we're figuring out, okay, how do you protect, the risk of confidential or of credential theft, right? Accessing confidential data or accessing your production system and potentially shutting it down. So you're absolutely right. It was, for us, at least at Anchor, it was both fronts. It was how do you enable people to work remote and then do it productive, because most of the people have come in traditionally, both in the office and the plants at our organization. And then on the other hand, it was, okay, well, now how do you protect the data, protect your production operations, and, still make a profit in this new world?
Absolutely. So I think that's some really great talking points for the audience on, why we view security the way we do and why resiliency is so important. What I'd like to do is shift over a little bit, Christina, to how you've leveraged some of the PTC technology to really enhance your operations and get some of that critical data to where you need it to be.
Okay. So let me go ahead and turn the slide here. So when I think about Anchor's journey when it comes to digital transformation, IoT. I think about the U.S. manufacturing firms, at least in glass manufacturing. They don't seem to be as mature yet as some of the European partners, and we happen to have a company that had a 20% stake in us that we went over to go and see how they were doing. How they were digitalizing, because when we went into their factories, you didn't see tons of people on the floor. You didn't see their processes were streamlined. Everything we saw about our parent company in Europe was that they were 2 to 5 years ahead of us on the journey of digitalization. So we went over there to see, how are you guys doing this? How are you guys getting data from all points of all different pieces of equipment in the plant that's facilitating a production process? And it was funny because I have a development team. We have an internally developed, should have started with that. We have an internally developed production system. So it's, very modern, basically uses IoT data from counter hardware, things such as cameras, and it's pulling it in to a web application that sits in Azure, and that's there's screens of that all around the plant, and it's basically giving the visibility to the plant operators who are manufacturing the glass on what they need to do. Our challenge is that we had, I had a small team of developers that couldn't keep up with what was needed to standardize the information, the real-time data across 6 plants. We would, our 6 plants, as much as I'd love to say that everything's standard from a capability standpoint, it's not quite there yet from having all the same equipment across all the plants. When I say standardization, it's so point being is that it wasn't a rinse repeat in terms of being able to say, okay, we've got, this equipment here at one plant. That means we have the same equipment at, it's all 6 plants. It meant we might have, this 1950s machine here that's, doing a scan of like the top of a container. And then at 5 other plants, we may have had the, 5-year-old machines that serve the same function, but that means it's a different way to pull in the data when you think about it technically. So our challenge is that I didn't have enough developers to keep up with the demand required or the capacity required to standardize. And so when we went to our parent company, BA Glass in Europe, we basically sat with them to understand, how did you guys do this and how are you doing it so fast? Because they were telling us that we were going too slow in terms of building out the product and then enabling the business with the data needed to make manufacturing corrections. And they sat us down and they actually brought up PTC Kepware, and they said, this is how you do it. And they said, this is, you can basically connect the IT to the OT using Kepware as your, basically they call it a universal connector, which is a term I've adopted. And basically they said, it's not like you need a developer to go figure out the protocols and then to spend the 2 or 3 months it takes to code how to pull in the data anymore. Basically, PTC has made it to where it's plug and play, where they do all that for you in the back end. And so having the developers with me, they were very, they didn't quite believe what we were being told. And so then we said, okay, we'll prove it. And so we had a non-technical plant operations person sit down with an IT person that was part of their digitalization team. And he literally went to the PTC screen, showed us how to add a new PLC type. And he did the whole operation in like 5 minutes and showed us how he could pull in data as soon as he did the configuration in Kepware. The net of the story is that my developer then said, by the time we were done, the only thing my developer could say as an objection to using PTC Kepware was he was concerned that the other developers on the team would forget how to do it the hard way, which is great, right? Because it's almost like saying, when the calculator was invented, I don't want to, they still have to do it the old way, which, wrong or right, it's just that tells me when a developer says that they've ran out of reasons for why they've ran out of reasons for why you shouldn't code. So then that takes me to our journey. So I'm not going to read through all the definitions, but when I think about the industrial IoT definition, the standard industry definition, and how that compares to Anchor's definition, where Anchor is and has been, we're progressed beyond the starting point, obviously, is we're looking at how we, across 6 plants, exploit real-time data. And what I mean by that is at the manufacturing, when you're manufacturing glass, there's a process today it's separated by sections of the manufacturing process between something called a hot end and a cold end. So when the glass is coming out of the furnace, basically it's being formed into a shape. And as it's being formed, there's certain types of defects that can happen. There's certain types of machine issues that can cause a bad bottle. There's a number of things that can happen. And before PTC Kepware, we were really reliant on a manual process of a human once the bottle reaches the inspection equipment, basically identifying the defects and then reporting it back to the hot end. One of the things that we wanted to do with Kepware was enable the hot end operators to know about those defects before the cold end could tell them, which means about an hour faster than when they would normally find out that they need to go and change a parameter on a forming machine. We were trying to get the data to them within minutes, but definitely with much faster than that hour it was taken before. Along with that, we wanted to improve our ability to do remote asset monitoring, which then we looked at how we integrate with another Rockwell Automation's Factory Talk View product. And then we also wanted to look at overall, thinking about the workforce, and, most of our workforce in the plants are at retirement age, or we also have had an issue with absenteeism since the rise of COVID. We wanted to look at if there's ability to automate a process that doesn't, require a human to have to write something down or have to turn a knob, then how can we use the PTC Kepware solution to help us automate? So switching or turning slides or going to the next page. This slide is really, when I think about a digital business technology platform, there's so many things that encompass it. Really anchors use cases around operational efficiency, and like I said, using data to drive decisions and to drive improvements faster than a manual process could give that insight. So this actually is an outline of the how you manufacture glass. What I've highlighted here is that at all points of our production processes, from what I'd call the raw materials to where you're mixing it, and then it's entering into the furnace, you're forming the container, then the containers are going down the line to the inspection equipment to where they're packaging. At all points, we have a PTC adapter pulling in data from either a piece of equipment or from a system that's basically enabling our operators to understand, to measure the performance of what they're doing, their processes, and or to change if they need to correct. And then if I move to actually I don't need to move to the next. Yeah, I'll move to the next slide. So if I look at the architecture itself, this shows how we've gone a little bit beyond PTC Kepware, not beyond, we've added to, in that we've looked at, okay, we have a production system that's internally developed, which represents APS. We have Kepware, which is our universal connector for data amongst all of our different processes that have equipment that can send out data outputs. And then we have basically it all interconnected with our Factory Talk View implementation. And the reason why is that we figured out that not all data needs to be centralized on a web page or on a screen, but there are some things that need to have, like machine issues, if a machine has a problem or if it's down, there's things that needs to have shop floor visibility for the folks that are on the floor, but it might not need to be seen by a plant manager or need to be seen by a corporate leader unless there's some major issue. And so what we decided is that our strategy today is we basically enable the integration for the data using Kepware, whether that's Factory Talk for displaying it or APS. We display the shop floor data in Factory Talk. So all of our 6 plants have Factory Talk View, and we use it for our furnace. We use it for our batch inputs, outputs. And that's managing the process and managing the performance of the process, and using real-time data on a screen. And basically those screens are up, and it's basically showing them a virtual, just kind of like the picture there. It's showing them a virtual architecture of their shop floor, but they have the ability to go in and change configurations. They have the ability to manage a lot of their devices remotely. If we have the need to where folks beyond the shop floor need to view the data, then we centralize it, which is another reason for this architecture, into our production system on a web page. But what all this does for us, even beyond this picture shows, is a lot of our processes were facilitated on paper. So this enables us to not only do real-time data, but enables us to get the information in a clean state, and so we can detect patterns, harvest it, and then detect trends and figure out, strategically how we can continuously improve our production manufacturing processes.
So not only are you able to leverage that real-time data for what's going on in the plant as it's happening, but it sounds like you're heading towards the direction of doing close to predictive analysis of what will be happening given certain conditions and being able to produce less waste overall as you move forward. Is that
Yes.
what you're saying? Great.
Absolutely, Tom. Yes.
I want to slide back to something you said a little bit earlier that I thought was important, but maybe we didn't get into a little deeper. Was that each of your, like Lawrenceburg, for instance, has a set of equipment that is producing your glass bottles, and you might produce the same glass bottle at another factory. But because of when that factory was built, or maybe modifications to it, or something as simple as, at Lawrenceburg, you were able to buy a certain type of PLC because that was the one that was at the best price when that line went in. And then at another factory, you might have had the same PLC, but then it broke. And then at that time that you repaired it, it was less expensive to purchase a different brand of PLC. Can you talk about why or how that affects your systems and how you leverage technology to make up for that?
Yes, absolutely. So that's actually a really good point, because PTC, that was the other thing that it enabled us to do. So our Anchor APS system, it brings in count data from counters, and it's basically telling you, here's your total amount of bottle counts or container counts from start to finish. And all of our plants traditionally had used Siemens PLCs at one point. When I joined, we only had a 1-plant adoption out of our 6 plants on our production system. And every time there was a PLC issue, I found that the IT team was the first ones called to come and troubleshoot a PLC issue. And it was my first stint in manufacturing, and so I was like, maybe this is just I'm new to this world, but I quickly found out, no, this isn't the new normal. IT people still don't have to know PLCs. It's just that the people in the plant didn't understand the Siemens brand. All they understood was the Allen Bradleys in terms of how to understand the hardware, the PLC programming on the OT side. And so that was another use case for utilizing Kepware, in the sense that now we have 6 plants with half of them that are still on Siemens, and the other half we've converted to using Allen Bradley PLCs. And we're working to convert all 6 plants, but in the meantime, the data is still flowing for all 6 plants using multiple different PLC brands or vendors. And we've enabled an additional capability in that the plants now can tell themselves. We've enabled self-service for the plants to detect if it's a hardware or a software issue, because before they didn't have the visibility into if the issue was a PLC. Well, once we brought in Kepware, we were not only able to use, multiple different flavors of PLCs, we're also now able to help the plants go in and tell us, hey, no, we see the issues at the PLC, or no, we know the issues at your software. So it's also taken off a huge load of my development team and having to do the operational support that they were previously having to do because we couldn't be flexible on the PLC type.
Yeah, I didn't even realize that you could leverage that capability to identify where the breaks are happening in your data infrastructure. That's a really great insight. Thank you.
Yeah, it's because we'd always get calls that said, it's your software, and then we would say, okay, well, can't you go and look and see if it's the PLC, or we'd rule out the software. And then what we found with Kepware, and that was one of the things that our parent company, BA Glass, showed us too, was that no, if you just show a screen, basically you can output the data onto a screen that's going to tell them if the PLC is sending the data or if they have a PLC issue. And so, but yes, Kepware really enabled all of that.
Great. As you're talking about success, do we want to move on to the next slide and talk about the success for Anchor?
Yes. So when thinking about the keys to success for Anchor, complete shop floor visibility, real-time data analytics. Why do we need that? Obviously we've spoken a little bit about this, but we want to identify issues faster. We want to improve the production process. And when I say improve, not just in efficiency to make more bottles, but we also want to identify if there's issues, if there's quality defects. Our motto is that, make the bottle once, make it right. And so, getting that shop floor visibility and using that real-time data analytics, it helps us, it helps us mitigate the risk of waste, in the sense that before we were having bottles that would get to the end of the line before we knew that there was an issue or a defect, whereas now we are detecting issues much faster in the production process. And so really, like I said, the keys to success is how do you continuously improve better than what you were doing yesterday? How do you digitalize a process of paper? Now, how do you use that real-time data to continuously improve your, like we call it, pack to melt here in this world, which basically out of what was possible to produce, how much you actually produced. And so that's really a big key to success for us. The IT/OT convergence, that's one where I definitely would agree. We don't want to underestimate the people aspect of the transition. We found in our world that in some areas, if you have the person who's been there for 30 years that loves to turn knobs, you might still just let them turn the knobs, and that might alone be part of the organizational change management approach. But at the same time, it's working with them to understand that the people that have changed turned knobs for 30 years, that now that they have to read data from a screen doesn't mean that they're what they were doing wasn't valuable. It just means that it's been standardized so that way they can do more meaningful work. And I'd say that at first we've had a lot of resistance, and as we're now on our 5th plant, in terms of getting the standardization project complete, I think overall it's one of those, once we got quick wins, if you build it, they will come. And then looking ahead, we're looking at PTC's technology stack, for looking at improving our operational resiliency. We want to continue the path of exploration and adoption of predictive capabilities. And our goal is always to go from reactive to proactive, because it's a 24/7, 365 a year operation. And that's something that, we don't have downtime. So when we ask the plants to take downtime, whether that be from a plant operation or process that's failed, whether that be from a machine being down, or whether it be from even the systems being down to where they don't have the data that tells them if they're manufacturing correct or not. We're always looking at ways of how we can improve and how we can ensure that we can meet the customer needs of not just today, but also tomorrow.
Yeah, going for predictive maintenance periods as opposed to reactive maintenance periods is I don't know what the actual percentage is, but I know that for every hour of preventative maintenance, the savings on reactive maintenance for accidental downtime is exponential. And then your comment around not underestimating the people, that's absolutely huge. Going back a couple of lifetimes for me, I worked on nuclear power plants in the Navy, and it was amazing that some of the engineers in the plant would be able to tell the pump was going to fail weeks in advance just by feeling it, and converting that knowledge, because you're taking the data now. And when that gentleman who's been there for 40 years retires, or whoever is doing that, you can now look at the data for when they made those adjustments and use that as an analysis to teach the next person, or to potentially automate it once those people move on. It's a great story. So thank you, Christina. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome.
I think we're about to head into the question and answer area section.
Yes, thank you both. We do have time for some questions. The audience may type their questions for the presenters in the Ask a Question box on the screen. We will get to as many questions as time allows before the top of the hour. Questions that we don't get to today will be posted online at controleng.com with the archived version of the webcast. Please remember to download a certificate of completion or a copy of the presentation. Use the event resource tab on the left side of the screen. And now we'll get on to the questions. And as we go, please continue to submit questions for Tom, Christina, or both. All right, the first question for the clear my screen here so I can see the question. Are IIoT projects that can be applied and adapted across your 6 manufacturing plants, are those given priority, or how are projects evaluated, Christina?
I think that you're always going to have the case, the exception use case where certain customers lead you down a path to where one plant may have something that the other 6 plants don't. But when we entered this journey of standardization and digitalization, we did it with the basically the executive sponsorship and needed to say, our standard will be that we prioritize technology or capabilities that can be spread across all 6 plants. We want to eventually get to the point where we can run any product across any line. And so with that mindset of standardization first, we could get there, which is why we prioritize those first.
Did your criteria change after you met with your partners in Europe? That was an interesting story.
Actually, I would say that we were on this. I would say that they are the example of standardization. So they are the ones who have already been there, done that, and now our partners in Europe are at the point where they are predicting downtime. They are using data to identify, not just when like a major machine will go down, but what are some of the things like an air compressor upstream that could potentially go down, and what's the likelihood using data. They're doing that analysis and they're making those predictions today. So long-winded way to say they had been there, done that, and they were reinforcing to us that that's like step number 1 to get to where they were.
Great. Another question, can you give examples of how data from different sources can be compatible for real-time use? Especially, you were mentioning some machines are 50 years old versus 5 years old. That must be a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, so basically, basically using PTC Kepware, they have pretty much a driver for just about anything you can think of. We have utilized PTC Kepware for things outside of our production system, such as we needed to integrate a auto labeler that enabled us to. We had already had it's an industrial automatic labeler, so where the pallet label for shipping out a pallet of glass containers basically is automatically populated. Then you have robot arms that are sticking it on the pallet. That was actually a different protocol, and then also a different PLC. And so we were able to use Kepware for that. But in our current production system, how we're using Kepware for APS, and then also how we're using it for even pumping the data into Factory Talk, Kepware is really that middle layer that connects all the different data sources in a manner that enables us to basically output real-time data. Hopefully that answers the question.
That would have had to been custom code in between in the past, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past, that's a good way. Thank you for saying that. So in the past, that would have been about a 3 to 4 month engagement for a developer per machine. So if you can think about 28 lines and how many machines are on each line, that can take, we'd probably been here for 10 years trying to get 6 plants using the same types of data across all the lines the old way.
Tom, you had a comment?
I did, yeah. So I wanted to add on that, Christina, I think that we've talked previously, and a lot of the stuff that you're doing in your custom application for Anchor Glass, but also in the Factory Talk screens that you're making, have sort of standardized views, and they have standardized inputs. And what I hear you're saying that I want to just emphasize a little bit is that you don't have to make any changes to those screens when it comes to the different PLCs or the different labelers or measuring equipment, because we're doing that data conversion at the level for Kepware, so that it doesn't really matter to that end application what the protocol on those machines are. which is really what our specialty is, so that you can save the time and have consistent screens between manufacturing plants.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. I call Kepware the one-to-many connector.
Good, thanks. Just a reminder to the audience to keep the questions coming. Any that we don't get to by the top of the hour, we'll try to answer offline. So thank you for your participation. For those fearing automation software or those who may not be as adept, how can a smart factory enable rather than replace operations personnel? I like the example of letting the guy push the buttons if that works in the workflow.
And I assume is that one for me? In our world, some of it starts up front, right, with the organizational change management and the communication. I think a lot of people feel fearful of what they don't know. So I think if you can show them an example of what good looks like, and then you also tell them why you're doing it and why it's important, then I think you get them to where they're at least open to it. And then I think that, and I'm just talking about the person view. When I think about the actual organizational view, it really helps us from the standpoint of, we have a lot of absenteeism. So because of COVID or because of not COVID, I'm not sure, but we're not filling our factories full of all the production staff needed to run from end to end certain days. And so what some of the automation we've been able to do has helped us with is, if a guy can't get in, he still has a screen to go monitor, right? And that's been enabled by Kepware machines or whatever. Or if we've been able to automate that process in itself, then we're still manufacturing quality glass containers, and we're overcoming the absenteeism. That's one of the other ways I would see that, the automation, how a smart factory enables the focus on how you enable continuous delivery of production for your customers. But in terms of the actual operations personnel and then their fears and concerns, I really think that a lot of that is handled by showing them the plan and then showing them a few wins, right? Sometimes I find that people don't know how. Change is hard for all of us. I think change is hard for me, for you, Tom, all of us. And so it's showing them not just the why, not just the quick win of how something's done, but it's also then showing them what's the path that's next for them. So you did this yesterday, what do you do tomorrow? And then helping them get the confidence in that skill. And that's some of the areas where I think, like in our world, we've been able to take people that, maybe they were that guy who turned knobs. Well, now they're the guy who is moved to a part of the plant that we weren't really doing a quality check before. So now we're putting them on more strategic things that will stop a bad bottle from leaving the facility.
And that's exactly where I was going to jump in, Christina, is that just because we're helping to enhance or automate certain processes, it doesn't always mean that a job is lost. It just means quite often, as you just mentioned there, that a job is shifted maybe to a place that wasn't being paid attention to, maybe to a place that is more valuable overall for the organization, and in turn might come with a higher paycheck in the end. You never know. There's lots of, by analyzing the data of a factory floor, you end up solving issues through automation, but also you end up finding places that are just as important as we're being paid attention to prior to that.
Great, thank you. Continue to type the questions in the Ask a Question box on the webcast console and click send, and we'll get to as many as we have time for. Another question, how did you get the OT and IT teams to work together? Christina, and then Tom also, do you have any tips in that area?
So, for me, it might be a one-off case in the sense that typically the way I would have normally approached it would have been, you find the engineering team on the business side at the corporate engineering team that, is doing the technology for the plant. So the ones out there buying the machines, the equipment, whatever. And then you partner with them on, here's the strategy, and then the priority, and then the rollout. Here's a little unique in the sense that when we first started down the journey, most of our engineers were tied up into a plant rebuild. And so when we first started out, it was a lot of road shows to the plants, showing them what we were trying to do. And we were able to get 2 plants to sign on up to be like the pilot plants. And then they actually gave us like their maintenance technician or their maintenance supervisor, along with one of their plant engineers. And so we went lower, almost grassroots style. Yeah, I'd call it grassroots style. So we basically we tried with the corporate engineering team, which typically would be who you'd look at to work with on projects. Couldn't do that. And so then we straight went to the operations side by fostering partnerships with the plants, and then found the folks that were, at that ground level, and then really started basically we started the pilots. And then we would do a pilot to show how we could pull in the data, show the use case for the data. And then we would get the operations folks in the plants, either the maintenance tech or the plant engineer, to then go and bring in one of the operators. If it was a hot end data output, he would bring in a hot end operator. And then if we would basically get those, show them then how would you, or not how would you, but basically we would get that operator to see how his yesterday process could be faster and better with the new process. And then we would pilot it on a single shop. And then once we got sign off from that, then we would basically would spread, go from 1 shop to 6 shops. So when I say shop, I also mean production line. Those terms are interchangeable. But once you started getting some wins, then you didn't really have to really convince anybody. It was just really getting them off the ground. It was some convincing, it was partnering, but it was also really quickly figuring out who understood the technicals, the OT technical side that could talk to the IT side. And you either started at the corporate, or which we tried, or you get down to it and you find out who are the people who are conceptually doing the same things that you're trying to do in a plant.
Tom, anything to add there?
I think a lot of it is echo. We've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different companies that are trying to do digital transformation and bring more data out of their plants. And I've seen it come from different ways, as Christina said. There's some C-suite in companies who start with a C-suite and try to work their way down. They introduce a digital transformation leader who's going to go in throughout the organization and try to make these changes. And I've also seen it come directly from the plant floor without the management team really knowing what they were getting into when they were first presented with some of the value. But that term value is the key piece, is you have to show value across the organization. So the operations people will need to see that it's going to be worth their time in the end to do this work, because it is going to take work for them to get it done. And then also the investment, if there are things that need to be invested in, whether it be software technology or slate process changes, the investment has to be bought into by management as well. So really the key is people and getting them together and showing them the value to each of the different roles, because OT and IT and plant floor operators all have different mindsets as far as what the most important thing is. And it's you've got to show the value to each one of them from their mindset, so that they can buy into the process of making a short-term investment that will pay off long-term.
Yeah, and Tom, I wanted to just add to that and say, really good point. Typically on any type of a new initiative or effort, I strive for the top down. I would say that this world in itself is still a little new for some executives, depending on the industry you're in. And so that was also a challenge for us that we had to overcome, where it was most of the industry and most of the C-suite seemingly knows the words real-time data analytics. They know that it's good. But I think that some companies are still maturing to, well, how do you put that in practice, right? What does that mean in practicality beyond the terms and beyond the words? And I think that was what I came into at Anchor. And so, so I think for us, it was, well, what I'd seen was we did a lot of projects here that in the plants that it would be top-down driven. and we would implement the new project, but then we never got rid of the old. And so the nice thing with this way that we did it was we weren't doing it the grassroots way or bottom up way. Was we got the buy-in right there on the shop floor. It took longer, and it took a lot more of, working together, trial and error. But, once we got one plan onboarded, then they became the ambassador, for lack of a better word, or sponsor for the next plant, because they all talk to each other.
And that leads, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say you can really drive efficiency or changes throughout the organization based off of efficiency changes. If you do a pilot and they save, depending on your process, a 1% or even a 0.5% increase in efficiency for certain business lines is massive in millions of dollars of savings or new revenue. And so if you can almost pit your different factories against each other and show, or at least with a POC, show that there is a gain in efficiency, the other factors, they're just going to fall in line. They're going to want that so that they can be more effective, have those cost savings, and be competitive in the market.
And I was going to say that ITOT cooperation, that leads into the next question, that kind of convergence in working together helps in industrial Internet of Things projects and helps prioritize what the next project to do. Christina, maybe you could give some insight about how you choose which projects. There's probably hundreds that you could do.
Yes, there is. I would tell you that here we have what I would call, we have 3 streams is what I would call in terms of how we prioritize our projects. And when I say streams, it's really how we categorize the type of project. We have what I'd call plant integration, which is I've got a new piece of equipment that needs to send data and I want it centrally, so I need to integrate it. That's one stream. The other stream we have is paper digitalization. In our plants, we still have some processes that we have the 30-year guy that's going and writing it on his notepad. So a lot of what we're doing in that second stream that has a high priority is how do we take the 3 people writing down the same thing 3 times or 3 steps and make that 1 step. And then the third priority is we focus on what is the information that if displayed real time would help us, to Tom's point, reach that extra 0.5% of pack the melt in my world efficiency. What are those things that'll help us spot a defect faster, so then we don't lose like 60 minutes worth of a full production. We can fix the issue and become more preventative versus reactive. So it's really around 3 things. It's around, will it help us do better from an efficiency and a quality standpoint? And that really focuses on the real-time data. Does it improve data integrity and enable standardization, which would probably be our paper digitalization? And then the new equipment is really around integration. That's always going to be a priority because it's around, making sure that we have the data we need to send a good bottle to the customer. And that's what I'd say.
Great. Time for one more question. Any hindsight advice from either of you? What could we do differently on the plant floor or planning projects to succeed more quickly or easily?
In my opinion, I think that there needs to be a little bit more of an emphasis on educating executives of, how they use these types of technologies to drive business results. I think that even in maybe it's just industry specific, maybe it's not. A lot of what I've seen is that it's not just training that needs to happen with a 30-year shop floor person. It's training that needs to happen top down across the entire organization of how you're going to change from the way you did things the last 30 years to how you're going to do things the next 30 years, and then why.
Great. Tom, anything to add?
Get people together and get them talking. That's the way how you're going to do it fastest.
Great.
Excellent. Thanks. Well, thank you very much to our presenters, Tom Gaudet, who leads product management for PTC Kepware, and Christina Shannon, Vice President of IT for Anchor Glass. The exit survey will pop up on the screen as we are completing the survey here. Also, I'd like to thank our sponsor, PTC, for today's event sponsorship. Now that we're about done, we want to hear how we did, so please do take that exit survey that will pop up when the webcast ends. Completing it will help us improve future webcasts. On behalf of Control Engineering and PTC, I'd like to thank you for attending. This concludes our webcast. Thank you and goodbye.